Hey there, it's Melanie from Chasing Fi, and today I'm going to tell you how I was able to take full advantage of the great resignation. Now, as you know, my husband and I, we are pursuing financial independence, but we plan on working probably for the next couple years. So while I have a part-time job at this point, it doesn't pay that much, and it seems that the requirements of the job are constantly changing now. And while I really enjoy working with the instructor that I'm working with and the other teaching assistants, I don't enjoy what the higher ups have been asking us to do. And I feel it's kind of counterintuitive to our mission. With that in mind, when I heard that people were resigning en masse, maybe about a year or so ago, I thought, well, what if something came up that where I could make more money, work less, and still be able to work from home at least 50% of the time? Now, obviously, those are very narrow parameters. Most people don't make more when they work less. But currently, I'm working 28 hours a week, sometimes up to about 32, like the last few weeks of the term. But I want to work less than that, but I want to make a lot more money than I'm making right now. My current position is paying me a little bit more than what was posted on the McDonald's sign in my town for the starting wage. Obviously, even though wages have gone up at fast food restaurants, I don't want to be making the same amount that I'd be making if I was working at McDonald's. And I don't even want to just make a little bit more than that. So my goal was to find a job that would fit that criteria. And in setting up that criteria, I had to rule out things that I absolutely did not want because I didn't want to spend a lot of time reading through job advertisements because at this point, a job is just a tool for me. It's just another stream of income. It's not something that I'm looking to build on as a career. So, what didn't I want? Well, for example, I didn't want any teaching positions that required me to have a teaching license and jump through a bunch of other hoops to accept it. Now, my teaching license expired last year. And even though I'm sure teaching hasn't changed that much, in order for me to get it back, I'd have to jump through a lot of hoops. And I'm just not really willing to do that. For example, during my short teaching career, I probably had my fingerprints taken, I don't know, probably 6 or 7 times. And my fingerprints didn't change at any point, but I had to constantly have them taken. It was just like this hoop that you got to jump through constantly, even though you would think, doesn't the state have them on file? Well, apparently not. So these are the types of things that you deal with when you teach in the K through 12 system. So immediately, all the jobs, of which there are about 950 at this point, all of the K through 12 jobs were out. The only job in education I'd be willing to take would have to be at the collegiate level. So once I narrowed that down, I knew what I wasn't going to be looking at. Next, I wanted to also set up some parameters for working from home. I am willing to go in to a job 1 day a week. I'm not willing to spend 8 hours there, but I'm willing to go in 1 day. But the job has to offer me at least 50% of the time I can work from home. So obviously that means that I'm looking to work 2, maybe 3 days a week. Now this sounds crazy, right? Well, here's the great news. I was able to find a position that fit perfectly. Only one, but I was able to find it. And the way that I found it was I just went on Indeed.com and I set up a very narrow search parameter. It only took me a few minutes, and it meant that Indeed.com would send me emails when the positions that fit my criteria came up. Well, because my criteria was so tight, I would only get an email every couple weeks, maybe every couple months at times, because my focus was so narrow. The reason that I made the focus so narrow is because I didn't want to receive emails of jobs that sounded kind of like something that I might enjoy for a while, or jobs that didn't quite have everything that I was looking for, wanted me to work more, paid less, things like that. I didn't even want to look at them because I knew that there might be some temptation if there was going to be an increase in pay for me to take those jobs. This stopped me from applying for jobs that didn't meet my narrow criteria. I didn't spend any time looking. I just put that out there. So if it wasn't going to be a giant leap forward for me, I didn't even need to see it. Next, I gave my resume a facelift. Running a small business requires you to handle accounts receivable, invoicing, marketing. You learn all these new tech skills that you didn't have to use in the past. And those are skills that I have sharpened over the past few years. So I put those on my resume. I also added in my volunteer experience, which is something that I don't know why, but I would always leave it off my resume. For the past 2 decades, I have held volunteer leadership roles where I taught people and managed money and teams, and I've worked in various settings. Even though I wasn't paid for those services, I picked up valuable skills and displayed my ability to lead. So I took some time to think about what are all the volunteer positions that I've held over the past decade? And what have I done in my small business that I wasn't doing before? So I updated my resume with the appropriate skills and posted it. The next thing I did was I practiced for the interview. I spent at least 30 minutes a day. Well, I spent at least 30 minutes a day on the elliptical, and I don't necessarily like it. But what I usually do is I'll put on a show on YouTube, or I'll listen to music or a podcast, and I'll just get through that 30 minutes. But once I got the call from the job that I knew would be perfect for what I was looking for at this time, I decided it was worth my time to plan for this interview and to practice. This is something that I have done over the years for any job that I really wanted. I would take some time to consider some of the questions that might be asked and rehearse them. So I did that, just hopped on the elliptical, talked to myself. I usually would do it when my husband wasn't home, so I wouldn't think I was crazy, but talk myself through the questions and prepare myself for, a possible job offer, all those things. And while I was prepping for the interview, each time I would do it, I became more confident and thinking, this job is mine. I really don't have to worry about it. When the interview arrived, it was great because it was virtual. So I'm in my natural habitat of my home, which is where I spend lots of time. And during this interview, some of the questions that I practiced were asked. Some of them were different. But I had a really great feeling that the job was probably going to be offered to me. And I think that obviously some of that has to do with the way I performed in the interview, my resume, my experience, my background, things like that. But also, I'm not fooling myself. I know that employers are looking for people who are enthusiastic and meet the criteria for what they're looking for. I think I did a decent job in the interview, but I also know that even if I hadn't, this employer is probably kind of looking for people in a way that they normally aren't. They might be a little bit more in need to fill this position than usual. So with that idea in my head, I knew that for this interview, I just really needed to get the person that was interviewing me to like me. I needed that person to feel comfortable with me and to think, we've got to have her on our team. Now, this is something that I used to conduct interviews with a former boss of mine when I worked at a treatment center. And one of the things that would get you in the door was if we really liked you. Maybe your resume was a little deficient. Maybe you didn't have too much experience. But if we really liked you, we'd give you a chance. And that is something that if you're going into these interviews during the Great Resignation, listen, these employers are hungry. They need jobs filled. They are ready to hire you. You just have to convince them that you are the right choice. And one way to do that is to be prepared. Practicing for interviews is a great way to get more comfortable just with being asked questions. You're thinking in those terms. You're like, okay, what do I think I'll be asked in this interview? And a lot of times, like for this particular job, I had to fill out some paperwork and answer some questions ahead of time. So I took those questions and I shortened them or expounded on them. And then I just talked back to myself, answering these questions. So those are all things that I did to secure the perfect position for me. It meets all the criteria. I'll be making 3 times as much as I was making. I will be working less than I was working, probably about 20 hours a week. I only have to go on for 3 hours a week. And the rest is not only remote, but I also can choose the time when I work. So this is the perfect position for me. It's like it was made for me. These are all the things that I want. So if you are stuck in some job that you don't like, or you just think that maybe you want to do something else, or you want to make a little more money, or you know exactly what you want from a job, write that down, set up some narrow criteria, and only apply for jobs that meet the criteria of exactly what you want. It may sound crazy, but that's going to be the way that you start to get what you want. So that's how I secured dream job number 1. Because dream job number 1 was the only one I applied for, and I was able to secure it. So now this gives me an additional stream of income, making 3 times as much as I was making, and I'll be working less, which gives me more time to work on my businesses. Perfect. Also, it fits right into my chasing FI lifestyle, where a job is not something that I'm going to pour my entire life into. A job is a stream of income that I'm going to tack on right with my book business, the real estate, everything. It's just another stream. It's not something that consumes my whole life. And I'm super excited to work less at a job in 2022. So that's all for now. How about you? Have you applied for any jobs during the Great Resignation? And if you have, tell me what your experience was. What were you looking for? Were you just looking for a better position? Were you looking for a promotion, more money? What? Remember to like and subscribe, and I will see you in the next one.